Hi everyone, welcome to part 4 of my intermediate park jet build series. So in this video, as the title suggests, I just want to talk about the process I go through to cut out the foam. So obviously I've started off here with a very large, a full sheet of model plane foam grade B, which is 24 inches by 48 inches. So it's pretty difficult to manage. So what I've done here is I've started to lay out. I normally like to start off with the wing plate because that tends to be the biggest piece, and I've already started to lay out some smaller pieces around here to optimize the foam. And I will probably what I will do is, to make this a lot easier, is I'll probably cut the foam sort of along here so that I will have two smaller pieces of foam. Obviously I just don't have the room here in this very small work area. The other thing is, I think the smaller pieces of foam, it's just easier to kind of maneuver around, because you want to be able to give yourself the best mechanical advantage when you're cutting, and not be cutting like way over top of something and cutting away from yourself. You want to be able to turn the foam and orient it so that you can make the cleanest cuts possible, I think. So there's a couple of things I mentioned in a previous video, a couple of changes, minor changes that I'm going to make just because I've built this airplane so much. So on this, this is kind of, I'll refer to this primarily as nacelle. It's obviously all one piece. You got the nacelle and the vertical stabilizer. So when we had originally designed this, I know maybe it's going to be a bit difficult for you to see, but you can see there's a solid line here that sort of angles out a little bit from this dashed line, which is where we would score, and then we would cut through this cleanly, which would make this kind of a bit of a flap, I guess. And what we were doing there was we would sort of curve this part up for a scale-ish kind of look, but it actually makes the build a little bit more fussy. So what I've done from now on, and hopefully you can see, there's a green line there. All I've done is now I just draw a straight line from the very back where this dashed line starts here, and all the way forward to where that solid line ends, and then it starts to angle out here, because these will obviously, it's going to be like this. This is going to be the bottom, so this will end up being one straight continuous score line now. Just makes things a lot easier. So I'll demonstrate that later after I've cut the piece of foam out, in a later stage of this video or a later video in this series. The other thing that I do, because I tend to angle my aileron servos, I think that this says elevator servo on the plans, but I think it actually should be aileron servo, but I could be wrong. But anyway, what I do is I find that this sort of strange shape that is on the plans is sometimes I end up crushing the foam because I install my servos after I've installed the KF airfoils. So what I do now is I've just drawn kind of a rectangle. This is 3/4 of an inch from the edge. Gives me plenty of room to slide, mount my servo exactly the way that I want it. Don't worry about the fact, if you cut this away. I mean, I've built some planes where I've cut a large chunk of the inside of the KF4 on the bottom in order to accommodate the ailerons or the servos. It doesn't have any real impact on the function of the KF. So for my KF4 airfoils, I will be using Dollar Tree foam or Adams Ready board. Hopefully you can see the sticker up here. What I like to do, I'll probably just leave this all in one piece, and I'm not worried that you can see this sheet is kind of bowed a little bit. I'm not too worried about that because I'm going to be taking the paper off, and normally once you take the paper off, it's easier to get the foam nice and true, and it's going to be glued anyway. What I do is my Dollar Tree store sells the foam with both white paper and black paper, and I found over experience, especially if I'm going to be cutting out pieces where I know I'm going to be removing the paper on both sides, is I'll use the stuff with the black paper, because the black paper, for some reason, it just seems to peel off much easier. Now because I use this Elmer's Craft Bond sort of temporary spray adhesive to hold my plans on, I will actually leave the paper on the Dollar Tree foam, you know, secure the plans to it, cut them out, and then peel it off afterwards. The reason being is in that way I'm not leaving any glue residue behind on my KF4 airfoils. Dollar Tree foam tends to really, you know, mark up easy and doesn't look as nice when you've got all this glue residue on it. The MPF doesn't, model plane foam doesn't seem to be quite as bad. So yeah, so that's that. So yeah, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pause the video. I should mention that if you're going to be using model plane foam, and I'm actually using model plane foam grade B, so it's I know it's going to be very hard to see on a video, but it sort of has one side, you know, kind of like plywood. It has a good side and a bad side if you want. So I tend to lay all my plans on the smoothest side, so that will be probably should be the side that's on the outside or the top of the plane. The bottom is, I know it's going to be hard to see maybe if I angle it, but it is a bit rough. It has kind of these little ridges on it. Now, if you make a mistake and glue your plans or fix your plans and cut it out, don't worry about it too much. I've actually done that where I did that with a fuselage of an airplane, and these little bumps and ridges, they actually sand off fairly easily if you make that mistake. The grade B is just it's cheaper, but it still has the same durability and the same stiffness as the grade A, so that's why I've just used the grade B to save a bit of money. Alright, so I'm just going to pause the video now, get this large piece of 24-inch by 48-inch foam cut down into 2 more manageable pieces, and then I'll get you know, some pieces of the plans fixed onto the foam, and I'm not going to bore you to death by showing you how I cut out every single piece, but you know, we'll get a few pieces, probably cut the wing plate out anyway because it covers a lot of things. Yeah, so I'll be back with you very shortly. Alright folks, back moving further along here with getting ready to cut out the foam. I moved the camera back a little bit, so hopefully you'll be able to see me. Just also hope that you'll be able to hear me, so I'm trying to raise my voice a little bit. So I'm just going to start off. I've got my my large sheet of foam cut down into a smaller piece. So I'm just going to show you, this is the wing plate, it's the biggest part. I didn't mention, model plane foam actually has, it has a bit of a grain, so the grain sort of runs the full length of the board. So it actually is, I wrote a blog post a long time ago on our old NAMC website, and unfortunately I didn't save it before we closed it, but it does have a slightly stronger, slightly more rigid, you know, the width against the grain than it is sort of across the grain. So that's why I always like to orient my wing along the stiffest part. Okay, so before we're going to spray the glue, I always like to spray the glue onto the actual paper itself. Just a couple of things about this this craft bond. You know, you do want to give it a good shake. It can get, the nozzle here can get a bit gooped up. I've had a very hard time pulling, you know, the nozzle off to sort of clean it. So I just take a knife and I sort of scrape any of the glue. Obviously, you know, always scrape up. Don't scrape down, especially if you get it pointed towards your face, because you know, ask me how I know. It can be very self-critiquing, and you can end up spraying yourself in the face with this stuff, and it's pretty nasty stuff. So you don't want to do that. So I've got my piece here, and give the glue a good shake. You know, if this is the way that you're going to do it, I'm just kind of demonstrating how I've done it. And then I just, very fine mist. You know, less is more here at this stage. Just a nice fine mist over, you know, the whole piece. If you find that, you know, part of it is lifting afterwards, you know, you can spray a little bit more, or, you know, tape it or whatever. So I like to start sort of at the bottom here, and of course you do have to be very careful because right away as soon as it touches it's going to start gluing itself to the foam before you're ready. So I just sort of get the bottom. Oh, I'm not far enough over on this side here. Stone up. Okay, so I'm gonna just kind of do this. I don't want to bore you to tears. So anyway, I'm gonna work away on this. I apologize, but essentially, yeah, you just want to get it oriented. So I'm gonna pause the video now while I struggle away with this, and we'll get it laid out flat. So I'll be right back with you. Hi folks. So wouldn't you know it, the minute I paused the camera, it cooperated. I guess I must have had a little bit of camera anxiety there. So. Yeah, so you just want to make sure, you know, especially with these big pieces, just kind of run your hand over. Everything's nice and flat. So I'm going to pause it again because I have some smaller pieces here that I'm going to fit onto this sheet here to maximize the foam. And then we'll start talking about actually cutting the foam. So I'll be right back with you. Okay, folks, continuing on. So I've managed to get the wing plate and several other smaller pieces. I've got my back plate. My two elevons, my canopy, and this is a vertical support that's going to go in the front of the fuselage. So let's talk just briefly about knives. This is my favorite type of knife for cutting model plane foam and Depron. It's a solid metal knife. It's kind of like a jackknife thing here. I really like this because I find it fits nice and firm, nice and comfortably in my hand. You know, because it's metal, it's got a really stiff backbone, so the blade doesn't tend to to move around on me. It's actually two blades, so once you're done, you've got one side dull, you can flip the blade over. Now for the blades, you can buy these blades. I've found these style blades actually at the dollar store. And then what I always also do is I keep an eye on the flyers and things at my local hardware store or Home Depot, and I buy these big contractor packs, where you get 100 blades at a time. If you get them on sale, you can normally get a pretty good deal, and these are also really good quality blade. So once I'm at this point, normally what I'll do is I will just cut the wing plate out, so get rid of all of these extra pieces, and then work on my wing plate. So just a quick, if you've already built for a while, just a quick review. I have one of these cutting mats. You can see here it's well used, but this is well worth the money. You can also flip it over. On this side it doesn't have sort of the grid like it does on this side, but you can see this actually used to be at the bottom. Because I'm left-handed, I really put a lot of use, but I've had this one now for probably about 3 years, so it's got glue and gunk and stuff on it, but it still saves the knife and saves the table. So normally I'll start with kind of the big long straight pieces first. So whenever you're cutting foam, if you're just kind of new to the hobby, you want to just kind of give it a bit of a score first. Don't try and cut all the way through sort of on the first one, because you can kind of end up crushing or ripping the foam, especially with this MPF. Sometimes it will crush or rip on you really easily. So in this case I'm just going to continue it all the way out to the end, and then just do another run if you have. Sometimes you might need to do 3 runs depending on, this is a nice sharp blade now, but as the blade starts to dull a little bit, you'll start to get a feel for how sharp your blade is. And then on this wingtip here, I'll just take these there's several little lines. I'll just kind of take each one of those at a time, cut the piece out, throw it in my garbage. But anyway, you get the point if you've built a plane before out of foam, hopefully. All right, so once again I'm going to pause. I'm going to get the wing plate cut out here, and then I'm going to talk about some more things, because there's a lot of stuff going on here on this on this wing plate that'll cover several different techniques that I've learned. So I'll pause the video and I'll be right back with you. Alright folks, back with you again, continuing to cut out the parts for the intermediate park jet build. So I've got the wing plate cut out for the MiG-35B. Not quite finished. I wanted to cover a couple things with you. One of the things that are on the plans, now I should say that if you've purchased this, the plans to this plane, the build instructions that come along with it are really, really detailed. We spent quite a lot of time taking pictures and writing descriptions, so I'm not going to get too in depth where I need be on actually building the MiG-35B. But one of the reasons that we left this piece in here was to prevent you, when you're handling the wing plate, damaging it or breaking off one of these parts of the leading edge root extension. So all I've done here is I've just actually scored here. So if the paper comes off, or when I'm ready to mate the fuselage and the wing plate, I can just cut this rectangle out of there. All right, so I've got the wing plate cut out, and you'll see I have some pins stuck in here, and I'll explain those. I've cut out all the slots. One thing I've learned over time, with slots, this plane full size is designed to be built with 6mm thick foam, either Depron or pardon me, model plane foam. If I was building with Dollar Tree foam, I would probably cut like on the very inside of the lines of these slots, just to make it serve a snug fit. You definitely don't want to cut them too big, because then it, when you're trying to dry fit it together and get it glued together, the dry fit can end up being a little sloppy, and then it can be hard for you to align. So I always will cut those either right on the line or maybe a little snugger, because I'd rather have to pinch the tab that goes in there to make a snug fit. So one of the techniques that I've learned is with my control surfaces, primarily like on my ailerons and my rudder, when I get to that point, is this dotted line here. That's where the control surface is going to move. So if you're going to use ailerons or rudders, what I do is that I just score about halfway. And if you're not familiar with how to score, you might want to practice with some some scrap foam, sorry. So essentially all I'm doing is just sort of going about halfway down, so that when I take all the paper off, I know exactly where the outside of my aileron is going to be. And the reason that I don't cut them out is, this is not a very robust piece of foam, nor is this. So if I cut those out and set them to the side, and then I'm handling the wing plate, it's very easy to catch these pieces and snap them off, and then you're continually having to repair a piece before you even get it together. So I will just score these. I don't tend to worry on this plane or pretty much any other that I've built. There are this little dotted line here, which is kind of an idea where the control horn might go. I don't worry about that. As we get later on in the build, I'm going to show you how I figure out how to place my control horns for all of my surfaces. So anyway, there we've got it scored. So if I just pull the paper there, so now I've got my ailerons are scored and ready to go. Okay, so on to these pins. So what I like to do for my center of gravity is, right in the center of this circle. The reason there's a B on it was when my partner Stefan was designing it, he wanted to always be able to remind himself that this was the B model, because we had built an A model before, so he didn't want to confuse it, because the center of gravities for those two planes are in different positions. So what I do is I just take one of these, it's kind of a bit of a thicker pin, these little, T craft pins. A little camera shy, the pin didn't want to stay in the shot there, so darn it, I gotta dig it out of my garbage here. Yeah, anyway, we're not going to worry about that. We'll use another pin. I'll just show you the technique. So I just push a pin right through the center, and then what I do is I kind of actually just sort of twist the pin around. I want the hole to be you know, a millimeter or two around, so that you know, it's very easy to see, so that you know, later on as I'm getting ready to balance the plane before flying, I know exactly where my CG is going to be. So there, we've got that marked. Now these other pins, if you're not 100% sure, you know, we've put where the wing reinforcement is going to be, and the MiG-35B has a bit of a unique shape because you know, there's a large part of wing here, and it's you can't really put the back plate is going to come in this way. You can't really put another spar back here. So we came up with this sort of pi, you know, the mathematical symbol pi. So what I've done is I've put pins on either end, and then what I do is I'll push those through, because I'm going to put, this is going to be the top of the wing, and I like to put my reinforcement on the bottom of the wing. So I'll push these pins through like that, and then I flip it over, and you know, I've got all these pins sticking out. And then what I'll do is I'll just take a marker, and I'll just mark, you know, just put a little dot on the foam where the end of each spar is going to go, you know, each reinforcement spar, for reference later on. And you know, I'm not too worried about marking up the bottom of my wing a little bit, because it's, you know, it's not going to be seen a whole lot except when it's in the air. So then, you know, I pull all these pins out. Oops. And now I've got my location for where the ends of all of my spars are going to go. You might be able to see here. Now I've got my CGs also marked. So yeah, so one thing I always like to do, especially on a part that's, you know, fairly busy like this wing plate is always just go over, give it a good check, make sure that, you know, like I said earlier in the series, I sort of highlight this CG with orange just to remind me to mark it, because it's a real pain, you know, if I pull the paper off and then I go, oh gosh, I forgot to mark where the CG is. So I've marked that. You know, go over it, make sure that you've cut out all the slots, so that you know, you don't get later on in the build and you got a tab, then there's no slot to put the tab into because you forgot to cut it out. So yeah, that's another thing that I do. And you know, you can mark, I don't always do it, but on this one we've got, you know, mark the tip for KF alignment, so I've just made a little mark on the very end of the wing. Alright, and then, you know, I'll remove the paper. So I'm going to continue just cutting parts out, and you know, when I feel I need to, I'll resume the video. Here's the part that came out from, you know, from down here. Now these are, just so that you're not confused, you can see here on this wing plate, this is actually a fairly small area here, and what we found as we were developing it was that sometimes this would become a bit fragile. So what we did was, these are motor mount reinforcements, and they're you know, they're marked front, inside, and they're marked bottom and top. Now I know they all look the same, but they're very slightly different. So what you want to do when you cut these pieces out is, even though I've built this like 10 times, is I leave that paper on right up until the point where I'm ready to actually put those on. And what that does is it sandwiches this area, sandwiches the spar, the wing spar, and makes this much stiffer, stronger area. Also gives you more surface area to glue the motor mount on. So yeah, so if you're cutting these out, I think it's probably explained in the instructions. I just leave the paper on these parts, these 4 parts, these motor mount reinforcements. So yeah, so there we go. So I'm going to continue cutting parts out, and as I need to, I will resume the video and just show you if there's any special techniques that I need to demonstrate. So we'll catch up with you soon. Hi everyone, back with you once again, just kind of wrap up part 4 here, talking about cutting out the foam. So I have all my parts cut out now. As I mentioned in a previous video, I put all my little small parts that could get misplaced easily. I put them in this baggie, so those are good to go. So hopefully I should be able to find those when I need them. One thing I just wanted to mention here on this the fuselage here before I take the paper off. On this MiG-35B, we've marked out essentially where the Velcro should go to hold your battery in. Now that's based on using a 2212 2200 motor, which weighs about 67 grams, and a 2200 3S battery. So if you were going to be using, say you wanted to use a lighter battery, maybe a 1500 1600 milliamp, you might want to extend your Velcro a little bit further forward. So it's this is actually going to be the outside. The fuselage, or the Velcro, will get glued on the inside of the fuselage. So again, what I just did, kind of similar to the wing support, or the spars in the wing, I just put a couple of pins around the corners here and then marked off sort of where my Velcro is going to go in the back there. So that's something to consider. Not all ParkJet designs have that, so you may have to wait until later. I like to glue my Velcro, put my Velcro on the fuselage when it's still flat. Just find I get a much more secure fit rather than with my big sausage hands trying to put it down in after the fuselage is together. So anyway, something to consider there. The cutouts now on this plan, we put the cutouts for the servos, primarily because we wanted to try and concentrate things around the center of gravity to get as much mass concentrated around the center of gravity. You don't necessarily have to put those there where we've marked them, but you want to consider that it's a little bit more challenging when you're building a score and fold ParkJet, where you're going to place your servos from a standpoint of getting good balance, and also how long your control rods are going to be, because you're essentially even if you just go elevons only, you're going to have to feed the wire from the elevon not only probably through this, like an intake like this one, or in the cell like this one, once this is folded, but then you're going to have to feed it into your fuselage. So you have to kind of consider where you're going to place your servo, and are you going to need to use a servo extension to get it fed into your fuselage in order to connect it to the receiver, etc., etc. So those are things to consider. Not all ParkJet designs, score and fold ParkJet designs, have the servos locations marked out, so you may have to sort of figure that out on your own. Again, considering how long you're going to need, control rods you're going to need, and how difficult it's going to be. Because normally, the servos are kind of extended or installed towards the end of the build. You want to consider how difficult it's going to be to feed across the intake and then feed into the fuselage so that you can connect it to your receiver. So those are things to keep in mind. I don't know how this happened for the hundreds and hundreds of times that I've looked at this. At the plans for this airplane over the years, but we've actually marked this cutout for the servo so that you can install the servo. It's marked elevator servo. It actually should be aileron servo. I don't know how that's happened. How many times I scoured these plans during the development and in builds. So I have marked just like I did with the wing plate. I've used a pin to poke a hole through the CG mark here. This should line up exactly with where it is on the wing as well. I tend to balance my airplanes to get the CG, get the battery located with the plane flipped upside down. So I don't. You can, if you want, on the MiG-35B, also put it on the bottom, if that's how you prefer to balance your planes. I always find I get closest to the CG by flipping the plane upside down, which I will demonstrate. So I have everything cut out, including my KF4s. So because I've made these with paperless Dollar Tree foam, I actually like to use, I've gone and buried my knife. I find for cutting Dollar Tree foam, especially with the technique that I use where I put the plans on top of the paper. I like to use a knife like this. I find that this blade just seems to be a little bit thinner than this knife, and I have much less tendency to crush the foam. So one thing to consider if you use this technique is you're actually going through 2 layers of paper before you get to the foam. So you want to be gentle. I found I need to be a little bit more cognizant of being gentle when I do that sort of first score to puncture through the 2 layers of paper before I start to get into foam. And then obviously I'm going to go through a 3rd layer of paper on the bottom. And I found that this, this knife, and I get these blades at the dollar store, and then I know it's hard to see, but there's lines there, and you sort of snap the tips off as they get dull. So I found that this is the best style knife for cutting Dollar Tree foam. So just real quickly, now that I've cut these out, the paper should just peel off fairly easily. So I'm peeling off both the plans and the paper from the that was on the dollar store foam. So yeah, just do that. Comes off pretty clean. And like I mentioned earlier in this video, I find it, with the black paper seems to come off a lot cleaner. Okay, so that's hopefully everything, covered everything about cutting out foam. Again, this, if you've built before, this is some of this stuff might be a bit oversimplified. So in the next stage, we're going to talk about, the things, little sort of fussy things that we need to get done to put reinforcement in our foam, and other things that we need to do to prepare all the parts to start putting them together for main assembly, as well as discussing kind of the first stage of hinging the rudders, ailerons, and that sort of stuff before we start to sand. If you want to taper the trailing edges, leading and trailing edges of many of the parts. As I mentioned, when I cut the wing out, I also just score where my rudder is going to be. You can see I've already removed the paper. I'm going to be using rudders on my plane. And in that next video, we'll also talk about taping the back of these score lines that we've made when we've cut the planes out, so that we can crack the foam and then actually start making the score and fold happen. So there we go. There's part 4, cutting out the foam. Thanks as always for watching and for your kind support to my channel. Please check out the previous videos in this playlist. If you have any other questions as to how we got here, and post any questions, comments down below. Blue skies, calm winds to everyone. Park jet noise, the other sound of freedom, baby. Take care.